Some see jobs. We see problem solvers. We see groundbreakers. We see risk takers. We see stories. Like a scientist turned CEO who went on to build a company producing medicines that saved the lives of millions. A young entrepreneur who started a business in a garage and now sells to dozens of countries around the world. A child who overcame dyslexia to lead the coding team at a global tech startup company. While every story is different, these stories have one thing in common: freedom. Freedom to dream, to create, to grow, and pursue. We are a nation where competition and collaboration coexist. A nation whose rich tapestry of people and ideas create innovation and opportunity. At the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, we advocate, inform, connect, and fight for America through business growth, building strong relationships that push us forward with communities across the country and governments around the globe, so that the story of America continues to inspire the world.
Hello, and welcome to the final episode of the competition series, where we dive deeper into some of the themes we began to unpack during the 2022 State of American Business event. Throughout this series, we're exploring how competition propels our country and world toward a brighter future of growth, solutions, and opportunity. Today's focus is on the competition for talent. When we lead on talent, we lead the world. But we all know that the competition for talent has become an urgent and complex economic imperative. The worker shortage is a crisis. It's contributing to supply chain disruptions and rising inflation, it's undermining business growth, and it's threatening our fragile recovery. We can't simply move people from one industry to another, or from one skill level to the next to solve this challenge. We must grow our workforce if we want to grow our economy and stay competitive. Today's conversations will focus on how we do just that. First, we'll analyze key trends that will define the future workforce. Next, we'll have a thoughtful and practical conversation on how to get unemployed workers off the sidelines and remove barriers to work for more individuals. Then we'll examine ways to attract global talent to increase our nation's competitiveness. These discussions will provide actionable insights to help ensure everyone in this country can go as high and as far as their hard work and talent will take them. Enjoy the program.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. As Suzanne made clear, solving our workforce crisis is of paramount importance to the business community. The fierce competition for talent is something businesses in all industries and of all sizes are dealing with each and every day. The fallout on the labor market from the pandemic has made the competition more intense. But let's not forget, it existed before COVID, and it will exist once the issues caused by COVID end. It was an issue for the future pre-pandemic and will continue to be one once it finally ends. We've been tracking these trends closely. The chart here shows job openings versus unemployed workers. It is unusual to have more unemployed workers than job openings. We have substantially more job openings than unemployed workers right now, and the gap has been growing rapidly. Joining me to discuss how businesses can navigate the mounting workforce challenges are Adam Ozimek. He's the chief economist at Upwork. Adam is a prolific writer and commenter on labor market trends. And Daniel Zhao, senior economist and lead data scientist at Glassdoor. Daniel digs deep in the data to help improve job searches so workers can find the best match for their skills. welcome Daniel and Adam. Adam, first question to you. We have a really unique circumstance in the labor market today. We have low unemployment and strong wage growth. But at the same time, we have a record number of job openings and diminished labor force participation. What has led to this? And what lessons can we draw from it as the pandemic ends?
It's a great question. I would describe the situation that we're in. If you think about labor markets, you have labor demand and labor supply. And what's happened over the last year is that labor supply has been lower than it otherwise would be. People aren't coming back to work as much as you might otherwise have thought. This is unusual for a recession recovery. Normally, people are willing and able to work in the aftermath of a recession, and what is needed is for labor to demand to come back. But if you look at the high level of job openings, if you look at the strong wage growth, and if you just listen to employers, it's pretty clear that labor demand is very strong. So the question is, why has labor supply not come back as much as we might otherwise thought it would have? And there's a couple of factors, some of them avoidable, some of them unavoidable. To start with the unavoidable things, we are still dealing with the pandemic. And the pandemic makes people, some people hesitant to work. They don't want to be exposed to the risk of the virus, even as those risks decline. They want, a really lower risk work environment, especially in areas where there's a lot of in-person services and contact. There's also people who have family obligations that are being tested by the pandemic, whether that's taking care of children because they can't get daycare or taking care of someone who is sick. And so those things weigh on labor supply for sure, and they have throughout the pandemic. The other sort of more avoidable things are related to initially we had extended unemployment insurance, which was paying a significant share of unemployed people more to not work than they made when they were working. And so that was something pulling people out of the labor force. Now those have expired, and so that's no longer a factor. Another factor is a high level of savings. For low income people, this was a year where income or total income was higher than normal. And that was in large part because of the stimulus checks that were sent out. And so people are sitting on this excess savings. They have more savings than they normally would. And that's giving them the ability to sort of withdraw from the labor market for a time being. What matters is that both of these things, the avoidable and unavoidable labor market issues, are fading. And I think we can see that over the last few months, where job growth has now been revised upwards, where we've been adding jobs at a significant pace over the last few months, October through January. And I think that's a sign that labor supply effects are fading and that they're going to continue to fade. I'm really not that worried that people aren't going to come back to work. I think in this country, we don't have the kind of really aggressive safety net that allows people to simply decide, I don't want to work anymore. For better or for worse, in this country, people have to work to get by, and they're going to do that. They're going to come back to work.
Thank you, Adam. I like the framing of the avoidable versus unavoidable, but I also like the message at the end that people will come back, because that's what businesses and we've all been wanting to hear for a long time. I think we'll come back to that theme in a little bit, but let's bring Daniel in now. Daniel, what do workers want to come back into the labor force from the sidelines? Another way to ask is, what can businesses do to get the employees they need to make their goods or provide their service?
Well, I think it's an extremely interesting question nowadays, because there's all this talk about the Great Resignation, all this talk about how people are reevaluating their priorities. And this is something we've actually done some research on using employee sentiment data from Glassdoor. What we find is that the day-to-day drivers of employee satisfaction really haven't changed during the pandemic. It's still the same three factors. It's strong culture and values, effective senior leadership, and career opportunities. And what is surprising to us is that hasn't changed. That isn't really a case of people reevaluating their priorities. It's just the fact that people are finding other opportunities out there in today's very tight labor market, which means that they're just making a rational decision. Hey, there's another job opportunity out there that pays better, offers better culture, and they're just making that kind of switch right now. The things that we have seen change during the pandemic is that there's much more emphasis on flexibility, on mental health and burnout and work-life balance. And we see that reflected in our data. So, for example, discussions of hybrid work are up 600% over the course of the pandemic. We've seen that remote searches for remote jobs are up 360%. So really, we have seen this dramatic shift from employees towards more flexibility, more options in their work arrangements, in part because they know that, hey, during the pandemic, we've seen many companies actually implement these policies and be successful, be productive, and employees want to be able to share in that, to have that same level of productivity, but also to get that flexibility as well. In terms of what employers can do, I mean, there's kind of the standard pay and benefits approach, but I think more specifically, we can talk about some strategic or tactical things. I mean, the first is probably that employers should think about how they're positioning themselves to job seekers in an environment where it's very competitive and you actually need to stand out to the job seeker as opposed to the other way around. I think maybe one like very specific example of this is most companies have evaluated what is their value proposition for consumers, but I would ask like how many companies have done the same thing for employees? What is your value proposition to employees or job seekers, and how has that exercise been done during COVID? Is it changed during COVID? And then maybe a more tactical tip is to think about what is the experience for candidates, because there are still very clunky parts of the recruiting process that could be improved. So as a very, very tactical example, over half of job seekers today are applying to jobs on their phones. Have you tested your mobile application process to see if it's actually smooth, to see if workers are actually able to even get through it on a mobile device? Like, I think that there are a lot of things that could be improved about today's recruiting process just by kind of standing in the shoes of a candidate and walking through that to see what that experience is like.
Well, thank you, Daniel. I had no idea that half of people are applying over their phones. I would never think to do that. I would think I'd have to see kind of everything in front of me and not be able to just look at the small phone. But that's really interesting and good for businesses to know. Really interesting, and I think it's important that businesses know that job seekers are still looking for that strong culture value proposition at businesses, that they still value strong leadership, and they're looking for upward mobility and opportunities. So let's feel free to address each other as we go forward. If you have something to say, please jump in. But Adam, let's go back to you. So again, very happy that you think that people will be coming back to work. And we saw that in a big way in the January jobs report, which was pretty surprising. But I guess the question that leads from that is, how long will it take till we get people back, till we get those couple million people that are out of the labor force back into the labor market? And what changes could we make from a public policy standpoint to get people to come back to the labor force faster?
So it's a hard question, because the two things that we're talking about are two main restraints on labor supply that we're talking about are not very forecastable. And that is the excess saving, when will that be spent down? And when will it be spent down enough to push people back to work who are still on the sidelines? And the other factor is, when will COVID risks mitigate farther, and how far do they have to mitigate in order for people to come back? My expectation is we're talking about the next 6 months, we're going to see significant improvement in the balance between labor and supply. That's my expectation, but it's not the kind of thing that we can point to very strong empirical evidence for either way. It's sort of my sense. And the worst news is, I don't think that there's anything we can do at this point. The most important thing is the things we shouldn't do, which is not get over the skis when it comes to raising rates. I think a lot of people are mistaking temporary factors for more long run factors, and that's leading to a desire to raise rates to defeat inflation, which has been higher and stuck around longer than many were expecting. But I think that would be a mistake to look at the economy right now and say this is this is as good as it gets. This is full employment. This is a recovery, and so we really need to start raising rates quickly. So that's my main advice: is take it easy on the rate hikes. Obviously, it makes sense to start raising sometime this year, but I think it'd be very easy to get ahead of where it should be. But other than that, you just got to kind of wait.
Yeah, a good point on the savings spend down, because I think we actually saw savings bump up. It was finally coming down in, I think, October and November, and it bumped back up in December. So we are seeing that when we get to more normal activity, people are spending down those savings balances. But when we had the surge in Omicron in December, we did see a pullback in spending, and those savings surged again. So hopefully, as we get more into the normalizing, people will spend those balances down and see the need to come back into the labor market. I do think your point that there's not a lot we can do to speed the process along, but there's a lot of things we shouldn't do. I think sometimes that's a message that really needs to be made clear to policymakers here in Washington. Daniel, do you have anything to add from what your research or your data shows about how long it will take to get people back in the labor force, or what their timeline may be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I largely agree with what Adam is saying about kind of the trajectory moving forward. Of course, it is very difficult to forecast because of COVID. I think on this question of elevated savings, we don't have great data or a great understanding of how that's distributed through the economy. So if these elevated savings are largely concentrated for higher income Americans, then is this really going to be the driving factor, or rather, how long is this going to actually have an impact? Well, that's less certain, right? The other thing that I thought was interesting about what Adam said is just in terms of, I do agree that we're going to see improvement over the course of 2022. We're going to see more workers coming in to the labor force and back into employment, because that's actually what we saw over 2021. I mean, I think even though the surprise theme for the year was labor shortages, that was something we heard a lot from employers. We did also see significant jobs growth, significant labor force growth. And so I think that there is a nuance here, which is that we are going to get a lot of workers back into the labor force in 2022, but it might not feel like to employers that it's suddenly easy to hire. We're not going to go back to like a 2010 labor market where there are vast pools of unemployed workers that employers can draw from. Instead, it is going to be more of a steady flow back into the labor force, which requires from employers to continue investing into putting in that extra effort to actually draw those workers in.
Yeah, very, very good points. To any economists listening out there, if you can figure out where all the savings has gone and stratify it by income levels, there's a huge demand and market for that information. So thanks, Daniel. So let's jump ahead, since this is a question about the future. Let's just go 1 year into the future at this point. If we're having this conversation next February of 2023, what does the labor market look like? Are we still seeing almost 11 million job openings? Are we still seeing a couple million people out of the labor force? Are we still seeing strong wage growth? What does it look like at that point? So Adam, go ahead first.
I agree with Daniel that I don't think we're going to see like a major downshift in the labor market to the extent that it looks like 2010 to 2018. I think it's really important to understand that a lot of what people think of as normal over the past 20 years really represents basically recessionary conditions, and we never fully recovered from the Great Recession. And so I think the Fed has learned a lot of things. I think policymakers have learned a lot of things from the recovery from the Great Recession, and I think that they are not going to hold the economy back like they used to, and that's going to manifest as, my expectation is, the next decade is going to be a lot tighter labor markets on average and a lot better for workers on average than it was in the previous decade. So I agree 100%. We shouldn't expect sort of the easy hiring conditions, and that's a good thing. We want strong wage growth. We want an economy that works for everybody, and full employment is a very important ingredient to that. A year from now, I expect inflation will be down. I think we're going to be looking at 3% or lower. I don't think we'll be back to target, but that's fine. This is going to be close enough to not panic anymore. And I think job openings are going to come down from their record levels, but not back to, they're not going to look low. So demand is going to, we'll see more of a balance in the labor market and less of what looks like, screaming hot shortages.
Got it. There is a theme that you both hit on that I think is important for businesses to keep in mind as we go forward, and that is that the bargaining power, the market power, is really going to be in favor of employees and workers relative to where it was from 2007 on until early 2020. So something to keep in mind, and I agree with both of you that it's not going to shift in the near term. So it'll shift eventually. These things never stay in one spot. But for now, workers, they really do hold the upper hand when it comes to the labor market. So Daniel, again, same question to you. What do you see a year from now when it comes to the labor market?
Yeah, I think this point that we're hammering home, that we're not returning to an early 2010s labor market, but instead maybe something more like 2019, early 2020, where it is exactly the right point, because that's when employers were feeling something much closer to a very tight labor market. And that is something that I expect is still going to be the case a year from now, even though I do agree with Adam, things will moderate. We'll see a little bit more of a balance. But when we think back to that 2019 labor market, employers were increasingly making investments into things like workplace culture, employee engagement. That was really the lesson learned over several years of experiencing a tightening labor market. And so back in 2019, we were actually saying the 2020s are going to be a culture first decade. Employers are going to invest more in workplace culture. They're going to invest more in employee engagement. And we think that the pandemic has actually accelerated that trend. Because of how much the balance of power is shifting towards workers, even if temporarily, employers are learning lessons about how important retention is, how important it is to reduce turnover. And those lessons, I think, will stick. And hopefully that will help in the long run, both in terms, both from a worker perspective, to help make sure that those long-term connections can stay intact. And of course, that can also help from the employer side as well, when you think about how costly turnover is and how valuable it is to actually retain that experienced talent, that knowledge over the long term.
Got it. Really interesting. So we've got about a minute left. So let's wrap up, since the theme of these events has been the future. Not to put you on the spot, and it's not a prediction, but based on your research and your work, what do you think will be different that businesses need to know about when it comes to the job market and labor market 5 or 10 years from now? Adam?
Remote work is not going away. It's going to be a major feature of the economy, and businesses who think that return to normalcy is going to mean remote work doesn't matter to them anymore are making a serious mistake. And you have to consider that even if you don't learn how to embrace remote work, your competitors may, and that may force your hand in the long run. So remote work is going to be a big story over the next 5 years and beyond.
Daniel?
Yeah, I would actually say something kind of similar, but on a different topic. So I would say that it's important to listen to the employee voice, because there's increased competition, because there's increased turnover. It's going to be increasingly important to understand what employees want and what they need, and to actually try to meet employees where they are halfway, regardless of whether that's remote work, better pay, better benefits. Like, it can be a whole host of things, but fundamentally that's the undercurrent, this shift in the balance of power that's going to be driving our conversations for probably the next several years.
Well, that's our time for today. Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Daniel. That was a really, really interesting conversation. Hope we can do it again sometime in the future. Next, my colleague Cheryl Oldham. She's Senior Vice President at the U.S. Chamber Foundation, will lead a conversation on bringing workers back to the labor force. Welcome, Cheryl.
Thank you, Curtis, for that excellent conversation on the trends shaping our economy and our future workforce. I'm excited about this next conversation because we need solutions to this persistent workforce shortage. Right now, we can't afford to overlook anyone who wants and is able to work. Today, we'll be speaking with leaders of businesses and nonprofits that are working with employers to think differently about their hiring practices and introduce them to pools of talent they might not have otherwise considered. I'm pleased to welcome Larissa Kautz, President and CEO of Melwood, Yaron Schwartz, Associate Director for Global Partnerships at the Tent Partnership for Refugees, and Mary Kay Zinowitz, founder of Bus Stop Mamas. Welcome.
Thank you, Cheryl.
So let's get right to it. I want to start by giving each of you a little bit of an opportunity to talk about your organizations and the communities that you serve to help them get back into the labor market or into the labor market. So how about we start with you, Larissa?
Absolutely. Thank you, Cheryl, so much for having me on this amazing panel today. So I am the president and CEO of Melwood, which is a company that was founded nearly 60 years ago with the goal of increasing people with disabilities in the workforce and increasing opportunities for disabled individuals to be able to earn a salary, a wage, and be productive in our society. So today, 60 years later, we're a leading employer and advocate for people with disabilities. We're based in the DC region. We ourselves employ nearly 1,000 individuals with disabilities every year in a large line of different business enterprises. But we also work with companies and the federal government, as well as local government agencies and chambers of commerce, to help increase opportunities for careers for people with disabilities. And I'm really thrilled to be with this great panel today. Thank you for inviting me.
We're so glad to have you. Yaron, how about you?
Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Yaron Schwartz. My pronouns are he, him, and I am an associate director for global partnerships at the Tent Partnership for Refugees, where I lead Tent's work here in the United States, working with the American business community on their refugee engagement. Just very briefly, the Tent Partnership for Refugees was started by the founder and CEO of Chobani, Hamdi Ulukaya, very much so based off of Chobani's own experience, hiring a significant number of refugees as Chobani employees. And so our founder, having seen the contributions that refugees made to his own business, started Tent in 2016 with this mission of mobilizing other businesses to do the same. And so just a few years later, we now manage a partnership of more than 200 large companies who are supporting refugees here in the United States and all over the world. And we at Tent provide companies with pro bono support to help them with their refugee engagement in a number of different ways, through offering them strategic guidance, sharing best practices for corporate engagement with refugees, and connecting companies to local implementing partners who they can work with when moving forward with a refugee-related project. And I'm really excited to be here with you all today to talk about how we could motivate, hopefully, more companies who are listening in today to support refugees as well.
Thank you, Yaron. Mary Kay, tell us about Bus Stop Mamas.
Sure. So I'm Mary Kay Zinowitz, and I'm the founder of Bus Stop Mamas. Bus Stop Mamas is a tech marketplace where that's specifically built for mom and allows businesses to gain access to her. We believe that that flexibility is the pathway to equity. And I designed Bus Stop Mamas a few years back. My husband was actually the stay-at-home parent for our daughter for the first 10 years of her life. And I got to stand out at the bus stop with all the other moms for the very first time. And here were all of us standing out there, all of these incredible women who left very promising careers to care for their family, all of them waving to their kids as they took off on the bus. And I thought, oh my gosh, businesses need this talent. These moms had attempted, some of them, to go back to the workforce to no avail. They got quick rejections or no rejection at all. And their self-esteem went down, and they thought that there was no way to get back in. And the problem is that businesses need her. They need her talent. They need her skill set. So I built the platform and actually my daughter built the platform when she was 12 initially. And we built a platform that allows businesses to gain access to her. And she gains access to employers who are building jobs for her. So what I mean by that is flexible work that fits within the life cycle of her children, from the car seat to the bus seat to the driver's seat and beyond. Again, we believe equity is built through flexibility.
I want to get into this conversation about flexibility and the pandemic, because I think we heard from the economists before us, certainly, that is the now and the future. But let's first talk a little bit about sort of barriers, challenges, and this is a question for all of you to dig in a little bit about the communities that you serve and the myths that maybe we can bust a little bit here about these pools of talent. And this is for everybody. So maybe Yaron, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the biggest barriers when we think about company engagement on refugee issues is that there's a lot of goodwill and interest from companies in supporting refugees and essentially even hiring and training this population. But a lot of times companies don't know where to start, and they understandably have lots of HR-related questions around work authorization documents, professional skill sets, educational backgrounds, and are really looking for additional support on how they can go about recruiting and retaining refugee talent. And that's really where Tent as an organization comes in, and really why our founder started Tent was to be able to provide companies with the resources, connections, and know-how for how to effectively set up refugee hiring programs and other ways for businesses to engage on this issue. And we particularly saw that with the recent Afghan refugee crisis, where there was a lot of interest from the business community in supporting Afghan allies, including the tens of thousands of Afghans who were resettled to the United States after the Taliban's takeover of the country just a few months ago in August of 2021, particularly given the historical ties from the United States to Afghanistan. And so we launched a new initiative just a few months ago in September called the Tent Coalition for Afghan Refugees to mobilize the business community to support Afghans here in the United States, mainly through training and hiring efforts, and really provide companies who are really interested in engaging on this issue with the resources and connections and knowledge that they needed to effectively hire and train Afghans and other refugees here in the United States. And that we do that also for the broader refugee population as well.
It's really interesting. It sounds like it's more of a sort of the challenges or barriers might be more sort of perceived, red tape or just difficulty in maybe accessing or things that a company would have to hoops that a company would have to jump through. I'm wondering with you, Larissa, how those barriers are different with a population of folks with maybe intellectual disabilities or other disabilities.
So fundamentally, it's interesting. The barriers are almost exactly the same when you're talking about it in kind of a global concept, which is, there's fear, there's misperceptions, there's these myths out there that accommodating someone with an intellectual or developmental disability is going to be extremely expensive or difficult, and there is some kind of stereotyping and a lack of awareness that leads a lot of employers to wrongly assume that disabled people are incapable of doing certain work, especially high demand and high paying jobs, and they're overlooked as candidates. When really, the cost to accommodate someone with disability is often zero or up to $500 in a one-time expense. And the accommodations that support people with disabilities aren't unique. Instead, options like flexible working hours and the freedom from work from home are inclusive practices that can support people in many populations. And the silver lining, if there is one to COVID, is that telework is here to stay. The hybrid working environment is here to stay. And this is something that people with disabilities have been requesting and pushing for many, many years as an accommodation. So we have this moment in time where we've got an opportunity to bust some of those misperceptions and be able to show that accommodations are not that expensive and that it's frankly, it's a simple tweak of a lot of your operating practices to really make interviewing, recruiting, managing and developing your workers with disabilities, those policies and practices will help across the board for your entire workforce and corporate culture.
And I think you mentioned this in a previous conversation, just ensuring that individuals with disabilities are part of any initiatives around diversity, equity, and inclusion. That may be something that is overlooked or not intentional often. Yeah. Mary Kay, what are the sort of the myths about moms or stay-at-home moms, I guess?
Yeah, well, there's many, and there's biases about mom that we all, including myself, have, and cutting through some of those. But and I'll get to that in a second. But barriers is our biggest barrier, maybe for all of us, is the ATS system, which is the automated tracking system that doesn't allow for some of these people that we're talking about to get through. And our platform eliminates that from the equation. So we think it's important that people meet people. So our platform does instant introductions. So everyone gets to meet the decision maker. And so some of our biases are, moms have them too about themselves. So for instance, we recently did a study with about 600 moms and asked them questions about flexible work. And 64% of our moms choose not to apply for a job because they believe that there would be bias against them in the recruiting process, which that's a big number. We know that our moms, as I mentioned in why I started Bus Stop Mamas, we know that moms have tried to go back to work. They haven't gotten in. They believe that they are not, their gaps in their resumes might prevent them from getting through to have an interview. So those biases about gaps in resumes and irrelevance kind of haunt mom herself, as well as the perception of who she is, what she can do, what she's capable of, and what she wants. And there are many layers to that. I see every day. I talk to moms, so many moms, and we are all different. We all have very different backgrounds and different children. And we do have a common thread that binds us. And that also is and that common bond is we want the very best for our children, and how we get there is different for all of us. So there's a huge opportunity for employers to capture this talent that has been sidelined traditionally, and just through offering flexible work.
Yeah, and it seems like, based on the conversation we just heard, we've been living in this pandemic for the last couple of years, and we've all been working remotely, or not all of us who are fortunate enough to be able to have a job that allows us to do so. But it seems like that's the future. And let's talk about how that has impacted your connecting your constituents in your communities to work. Has it helped? How have you seen sort of shifts in attitudes of employers? Mary Kay, do you want to start?
Well, sure. So yeah, over the last 2 years, there's been a huge shift. So we've gone from, kind of a denial about how many women exit their careers to care for their children. Prior to COVID, 43% of women exited their careers, and post-COVID, we know that the numbers are grand. And so what this has done for Bus Stop Mamas is, just in the last 6 months, we've been contacted by enterprises, Fortune 100 companies that are seeking to connect with us to align themselves with Bus Stop Mamas, because they see that they're losing a critical market. They've lost a critical market. They need to retain that critical market internally, the people that they have left, and they need to get her back. So we recently partnered with Boston Scientific, and we are undergoing a pilot with them. And this is, big. It's big that businesses see relevance in how can we change our organizational practices that were designed for forever for him, to now redesign those practices, those business operations, to include her. If it weren't for the pandemic, we probably wouldn't have had this acceleration in understanding about how important she is to that workforce. We know that 65% of college graduates are female. We know that she is needed in business. We know that 86% of females are mothers, and this is an essential issue for businesses to figure out. So we have companies also that are coming to us, like Caribou Coffee, designing jobs, building jobs specifically for her. That is huge.
Yaron or Larissa, do either one of you want to chime in with this question, and then we'll get to a few more before our time is up. I can't even believe it.
Sure. So, one of the benefits, like I said, of COVID has been that we've stripped away some of those misconceptions we've had about what it really takes to be able to do a good job. And we look more at the skills that are needed as opposed to some of the niceties of how good of a rapport can you have during an interview. We've stripped away some of the barriers of transportation and other things that people with disabilities have been struggling with for decades and hundreds of years. And we've got companies like KPMG, GDIT, and others who are taking the step to invest in learning about the value of having a hiring initiative that is inclusive of people with disabilities and really championing people with disabilities in their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, which is huge. And it's been amazing to see. And, we're happy to be working with a lot of these companies to create training programs that'll get people with disabilities the technical skills in fields like construction, cybersecurity, different tech issues where there's such a need for labor, and make sure that they're qualified, they have the job skills and the certificate they need, and then helping the employer navigate some of those other things of how do you make the interview more inclusive? How do you really evaluate someone for the job that they need to do, as opposed to some of these other more abstract things that we've measured potential employees for in the past?
Yaron, what about your work? Have you seen the pandemic sort of shift the employers that you're working with in terms of their attitudes towards the refugee community and that untapped pool of talent?
Yeah. Since we launched the 10 Coalition for Afghan Refugees in September of 2021, the network has now grown to over 65 leading companies like Amazon, Hilton, Pfizer, Airbnb, FedEx that are stepping up to hire and train Afghans and other refugees here in the United States. And I think that there are two main motivations for companies to join. One is that there's a genuine interest in supporting Afghan allies, particularly from veterans at these businesses who might have served in Afghanistan alongside these folks. And then there's also the labor shortage question, where I think, as we're hearing today, companies are really interested in looking at new sources of talent and are really looking to Afghans and other refugees to help fill labor gaps at all different skill levels. And so are seeing that refugees can really be a great source of talent for their business, whether it be because refugees have higher retention rates than the average employee, or because they're incredibly hardworking and come with a variety of different skill sets and experiences. I think that there's a real openness right now from the American business community in hiring and training Afghans. And we at Tent are providing them with the tools and resources and guidance they need to do that work effectively.
Thank you for that. And we are a couple minutes left. So I want to end with, you've got a large audience of business advocacy organizations, others. I guarantee you the people listening have a worker shortage, because we are talking about it with them all the time. So let's quickly go through each of you and say, what are some practical tips or anything you would say to our audience of how to connect with you and the communities you serve? Yaron, you go first.
Sure. So I would love to hear from folks. My email is just my first name, yaron@tent.org. And we work with any companies that have over 2,000 employees or $500 million in revenue. And we provide companies with pro bono support to help them with their refugee engagement. We have a monthly working group call to share lessons and best practices with other companies. We run training webinars on the process for onboarding, recruiting, and integrating refugee talent. We can connect you to local NGOs that can help you hire refugees in different markets, and are generally here to be your pro bono advisors and connectors in this space. And so would love to hear from any companies on the line who meet our threshold to reach out and for us to connect about how Tent can support you with your refugee engagement.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Larissa?
Thank you, Cheryl. So I would encourage companies watching, chambers watching, to contact melwood.org. And talk about, this value proposition that to employees that employers are trying to find, and to learn more about what our workers want. Amid this kind of COVID reset, creating an inclusive and accommodating workforce for disabled people is a critical step as companies look to attract and retain talent while fostering diversity, equity, and inclusion. 1 in 4 people in this country have a disability, and 1 in 44 children are being diagnosed with autism. This is a community that needs to be included in the workforce, and they have so much to add in terms of innovation, creativity. And so, partner with an organization that's an expert in this, like Melwood, is an important step towards fostering an environment where all employees are given the tools that they need to succeed, and you have all the employees that you need to succeed.
Absolutely. Mary Kay, you're going to have the last word.
Great. Well, thank you. I would encourage everyone watching to take a look at our website, which is our platform. It's Bus Stop Mamas, MAMAS, so Bus Stop and Mamas. It's super simple to post a job right to our network. We have about 7,000 moms in our network, and that network grows every day. We know that job descriptions are the catalyst for change internally. So when asking for advice, we have good advice on job descriptions. Please just go to our website, take a look, post a job. It's super simple and quick. If you have large numbers of jobs that you are interested in shaping for flexibility, give us a call. We do subscription fees, and we work with every size company. So from very small one-person organizations to Fortune 100 companies, we fit every business that is looking for change. So there's been traditionally 2 lanes in workforce, the job posting and recruiting. Bus Stop Mamas is a new lane, and we allow mamas to drive and businesses to reach her. I hope you will give us a try, and please always feel free to give me a call. My number and contact information is on our website.
Thank you, Mary Kay. Thank you all so much. I think one of the really important messages here to employers who are engaged with us today is you don't have to go at this alone. There are professionals like Mary Kay and Larissa and Yaron and their organizations who can really help you to navigate. And as we said at the beginning, rethink how you're hiring and the pools of talent you are recruiting from. So thank you all so much for joining. And I know we could go on for hours. But I'd now like to welcome my colleague, Neil Bradley, Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you, Cheryl. To conclude today's program, we're joined by Florida Congresswoman Maria Elvira Salazar to discuss what can be done to fix our nation's immigration system. A reformed legal immigration system is the key to keeping our economy competitive globally and growing here at home. With businesses facing many issues today, like the workforce shortage crisis and logistical and supply chain challenges, immigration can prove a vital helping hand. Congresswoman Salazar is no stranger to the immigration debate, and I know she has many ideas about how to fix our nation's broken immigration system so it can help drive economic growth, job creation, and prosperity. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Congresswoman Salazar. Congresswoman, good morning. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, we've spoken in the past about your desire to tackle our nation's broken immigration system, and you have just come out with a piece of legislation called the Dignity Act. And if I can be so bold as to say, it's a pretty bold piece of legislation. So why did you decide to introduce this? Why did you decide to take on one of the most intractable policy challenges that's confronted our nation?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. My dad used to say, when you have big problems, you have to create big solutions. And that is exactly what we're doing. And why did we do this? Well, number one is the right thing to do. Number two, we are a nation of laws and we have to follow them. And number three, we're a very benevolent and good nation that we want to give second chances to the people who are living among us. So we know that the system is broken, not only economically speaking, politically speaking, socially speaking, and culturally. You know what's happening at the border. So that is why we decided to introduce the Dignity Act. And I love the name, and I'm going to explain to you what that means in a minute. But that's why, because it's the right thing to do.
So let's dive into some of the details. What's your bill do? How do you think it's going to help solve the problems? And don't forget to tell us why you called it the Dignity Act.
Well, the dignity is because we want to give dignity to those people who are living in the shadows. And I'm going to explain to you who those people are now in a minute. But what does it do? It stops illegal immigration. We cannot have what's happening at the border where you have hundreds of thousands of people coming in and you really do not know who they are. It stops that with heavy technology. Number two, it provides dignity to live in a dignified life to those who have been among us and they're illegals, or they don't have papers, or they snuck in 20 years ago or 15 years ago, and they are helping the economy. The good people that live among us and that are contributing to our economy, but that have no papers. And number three, because it helps the economy, is going to help the economy. There is no way that we can continue being who we are, the country that we are, and living the American dream, not only for those who are coming in, but for those who live here, people that were born here like me. I'm first generation Cuban American. We adore the American dream. Well, we got to keep it alive. And how do we do that? Well, we got to bring hands to the economy. And my bill, what it's going to do is going to do few very important things, but for the economic side, is going to build and is going to replenish, the workforce and is going to build a new one. I repeat, the American dream is what keeps this country strong, and the American dream is the economy. So let me just explain to you from the economic point of view. I think this is going to be probably my longest answer, but we know, as you said, that right now you have this, and I want to be very rigorous, so I'm going to look at my notes here. How many industries are dying because they cannot find hands? Agricultural, restaurants, manufacturing, hotels, tourism, that's dying down. If you go in district number 27 and you're asking people, how are you doing? Well, I'm doing well, but I can't find workers. So with Dignity, we create instantly almost 10 million new workers legally, that we provide them some legality. And then that not only helps you with that growth that I was talking to you about, but it's a reliable workforce. If you are a farmer in Northern Dakota, or if you are in Southern California, and you need to make sure that those boys, that probably most of them belong to my ethnic group, and those boys need to be there on Monday morning to pick up the jalapeno peppers or the tomato or the oranges or the berries or the peaches. You need to have something reliable. So Dignity gives them a dignified way of living, and they will show up because they're very happy to be part of the promised land. Also, it creates fair rules for everyone. Why are we going to be benefiting the agricultural industry and not the construction or the hospitality or the restaurant industry? It's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. And on top of that, no more shadow economy. I mean, that's for the banana republics. We need to bring all those people out, pay them, have them pay taxes, and have them live in dignity. So I think that I more or less answered, but if you have other questions about the business side, but this is a very important economic bill. So we create a new workforce, by 2035, according to all statistics, by 2035, 35% of hands working in the American economy are going to be immigrant hands. And not only that, let me just give you another piece of info, which is very important. 1 out of 5 businesses that are created in the United States are created by immigrants. Almost half of the the Fortune 500 industries were created either by an immigrant or their children, I being one of them. So immigrants are in love with America, and we just want to create a fair set of rules so they can come, enjoy the promised land, and help the American economy.
Well, Congresswoman, you said 2 really important things there that I think are music to the ears of business owners across this country. First is they want to do the right thing. They want to hire people who can legally work for them. But they're in a rock and a hard place today. So we had a workforce shortage crisis before the pandemic. We have, by some estimates, 2 million fewer legal immigrants into this country over the past couple of years. And we now have record high numbers of open jobs, nearly 11 million open jobs, and no way to fill them. So you're giving them a pathway to do what they want to do, which is hire people legally to meet their customer demands, and at the same time, make sure that they're doing the right thing by the rule of law.
Because, this is a toxic and dysfunctional system. If you are a restaurant owner in North Dakota and you need workers because you need to help your give good service to your patrons, right? So you need to hire bodies, and those bodies are not legal. So what are you going to do? You're like you said, you're in a very tough position because you need that service, but those are illegals. So then you don't know what you're going to do. That's not the American way. And then that person that's coming in, that could be legal, that person wants to live a dignified life, not necessarily path to citizenship. People in my group, the largest minority in the country, 20% of the population, the Hispanics, the Latinos, the Browns, whatever you want to call it, we love the United States and we want to live a dignified life. That doesn't mean that we want to have path to citizenship. The overwhelming majority of the workforce that comes from my ethnic group is not thinking about path. Is thinking about, I don't want to get deported. I want to go to work. I want to work hard. I want to make money. I want to send money back home. And I want to live the fruits of the promised land. What's wrong with that? Well, so far, we've not been able to put that together for the last 35 years. So it's time from someone to say, come on, let's fix this and let's all live the American dream.
So I want to turn in a moment to how we can help get this done and what you're hearing from your colleagues. But before that, I want to ask, this is a pretty comprehensive piece of legislation, but there are some aspects that it doesn't cover, H-1B, high-skilled visas, employment-based green cards. Is there other work that's going on kind of behind the scenes that you're involved in Congress on those issues? And might we hear more about that in the future?
Yes, and we're working on that. And there's a group of Republicans that are taking care of that legislation. But I believe that having a complete immigration reform is the first thing. First things first. Let's fix what's really, really, really broken. And then we're going to be able to have an open window for us to take care of those other issues that are also related to immigration, but that is not the first thing that we need to do. We need to do the border, put order at the border, then give dignity to those who are here. Provide, as I said, a workforce for people like your group that want to do the right thing, that want to follow the rules, that want to pay legally, and they want those workers to pay their taxes. So we're taking the toxicity or the dysfunctionality out of the system.
So I know you've been working on this legislation, frankly, since you were first elected. What are you hearing from your colleagues? What are you hearing from your fellow Republicans? How about the Democrats across the aisle? What kind of reaction are you getting?
Look, my party, the GOP, recognizes that across the board that this needs to be done, and that this is going to be good for the American business and for the American economy. They just need to be more vocal. And I am giving them the opportunity as the brown girl from the hood with an accent who is in love with the American exceptionality and who understands my group, my ethnic group so well. The Hispanics in the United States, that probably 60%, 70% of the agricultural workers are part of my group. So the GOP is welcoming us now more than ever, and now that's why we need to create a path. We need to create a way of solving this problem. But this is not a political issue. This is an American issue. So I have spoken with my colleagues across the aisle. The Dems are also very interested in solving this, but they have not been able to figure it out either for 35 years. So this is not a political or a party problem or a political party problem. This is an American problem. And that's why I'm here. That's the only reason why I thought that I was going to be able to contribute, or the first thing that I could do to contribute, not only with my party, but with the country. Because, you know, I owe it to my ancestors and to every single immigrant that has come here and that loves the United States.
Well, our audience may not be aware of this, but the first time you appeared on a chamber program like this, we actually interviewed you and one of your freshman Democratic colleagues on how we could find common ground on immigration. And I have to say, folks should Google it and go look it up, because it's a perfect example. You all didn't agree on everything, but you looked at conversation, finding areas of agreement to explore and work together. I hope those kind of conversations are still continuing,
yes,
because
they are.
that's going to be the key to pulling this together. Let me ask, you know, as I said earlier, people are excited to hear this news and to see that progress is being made. But we know it takes a long way to move from a bill that's introduced to the law of the land and a problem being solved. So how can we help? What would you like to see from the U.S. business community? How can we join in this effort? How can we stay informed?
That's a fantastic question, and it has a very direct and solid and needed answer. I need everyone that is listening to this video and everyone that is part of your community and your association to call to your federal representative. Talk to leadership in both parties. Get involved. Send the message out there that the Dignity Act has been put in the hopper, that we have introduced. It is more than 500, why don't you give it to me so I can show it? 500 pages written by extraordinary committed, right there, extraordinary committed people in my office. Probably this is the first time that one office writes a bill of this importance by ourselves and on our own, obviously incorporating the three bills that had previously been passed or accepted or agreed upon by both parties. So we have included everything here, and we have created a bill that I'm sure can be supported by both parties. But then now I need the business community to support us and to be behind us, pushing us to the finish line. So talk to your representative.
Well, Congresswoman Salazar, we got our marching orders. We very much appreciate, you know, you talk to people across this country, and they're looking for elected officials who are leaders, who are willing to tackle tough problems. And it's not easy, right? You know, it would have been easy not to put the work into those 500 pages.
But it's the right thing to do. And as Americans, we always do the right thing, or we try, and that's why we're the best country in the history of humanity.
That is the perfect place to leave it. Congresswoman Salazar, thank you for your work, and thank you for joining us.
To you for this opportunity.
Hello, I'm Marty Durbin, Senior Vice President of Policy at the Chamber. I hope you enjoyed today's conversations on how we can pursue better policies to bring workers who are on the sidelines back to the labor force, attract the best talent from around the world, and develop an education pipeline to reskill people for the future of work. As Suzanne Clark said in her State of American Business address last month, the competition for talent gives people the opportunity and incentive to achieve their dreams. It harnesses the best of human imagination and ingenuity for the benefit of society. She also said our nation's greatest advantage is its diversity of people, perspectives, and ideas. So if we ensure that everyone has the skills, education, and opportunity to go as high and as far as their hard work and talent will take them, we can not only fill the nearly 11 million jobs that sit vacant today, we will be prepared for the jobs of tomorrow. Today, we saw many opportunities for business leaders and policymakers to come to the table and find solutions to this workforce crisis. Our thanks to today's speakers who showed the economic trends that will define our future workforce and have major implications for growth. Thanks also to our panelists who who are actively building networks to bring more talented and skilled workers to the labor force. Whether that's helping working parents and caregivers with solutions for finding the right balance, or supporting individuals with disabilities to ensure they have the opportunity to work. And thank you, Representative Salazar, for your commitment to immigration reform. To allow businesses to meet their workforce needs, we must implement common sense immigration policies. When American businesses are empowered to bring international talent to the workforce, we renew our nation's legacy as an open and welcoming country where anyone who works hard can attain his or her goals. We appreciate you joining us for the State of American Business and our Competition Series programs to discuss our policy priorities and, of course, learn more about how businesses are tackling some of our nation's toughest challenges with private sector solutions. We look forward to hearing how you use tools like our Workforce Data Center to meet the challenges and needs of your own business. And we hope to see you at future programs. From the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, thank you and have a good day.